The auction hall on Station Vel 9 smelled like fear and cleaning chemicals. Commander Peter Hayes stood near the back wall, his arms crossed over his chest as he watched the proceedings with growing disgust. He had come to this distant trading station for routine diplomatic work, not to witness what could only be described as legalized slavery. But here he was, watching desperate beings sell away their freedom for the simple right to survive. The auctioneer, a tall Krellmite with 6 arms and a voice that echoed through the chamber, gestured toward the platform. Next lot. Female Thelnari, age 28 standard years. Healthy. Literate in 4 languages. Offering 10-year standard contract. Peter's jaw tightened as a slender figure climbed onto the platform. The Thelnari woman had pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the harsh lights. Her large dark eyes were sunken with exhaustion and hunger. She wore a simple gray tunic that hung loosely on her thin frame. But what made Peter's stomach turn was the small child clutching her leg, barely reaching her waist. The little girl could not have been more than 6 years old by human standards. Her skin had a grayish tinge that Peter suspected was not natural for her species. She buried her face against her mother's leg, tiny hands gripping the fabric of the tunic like it was the only solid thing in her universe. The juvenile is not part of the contract, the auctioneer announced flatly. However, standard food stipend of 50 credits per lunar cycle will be provided to the contracted worker. Bidding starts at 500 credits. Peter glanced around the room. About 30 beings filled the space, representing a dozen different species. Most were labor brokers, their expressions cold and calculating as they assessed the woman on the platform like she was machinery. A few wore the insignia of mining corporations. One group in the corner made Peter's skin crawl. They wore the subtle markings of pleasure station operators. 500, called out a broker near the front. The Thelnari woman, who Peter would later learn was named Sela, did not react. She stood perfectly still, staring at nothing, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's head. 550, another voice rang out. Peter had done his research on the trip to Vel 9. He knew that Thelnari were herbivorous, requiring a specific diet of plant-based proteins and minerals. He also knew that Station Vel 9, like most industrial stations in this sector, primarily stocked rations designed for carnivorous and omnivorous species. The herbivore options were expensive, considered specialty items that most stations only kept in limited supply. 600. The bid came from a mining corporation representative. Sela's daughter, Kira, whimpered softly. The sound was barely audible, but it cut through Peter like a blade. He watched as Sela bent down slightly, whispering something to the child in their native language. Her voice was gentle, reassuring, even as she stood on a platform selling herself into servitude. 650, called the pleasure station operator. Peter felt his hands curl into fists. He knew what that meant. He had seen too many reports, read too many accounts of what happened to desperate aliens who fell into those contracts. The terms were always legal, always technically voluntary. That was what made it so obscene. 700. The mining corporation again. Through his sources, Peter had learned the horrible mathematics of Station Vel 9. The basic food stipend of 50 credits per month was enough to purchase the cheapest carnivore rations. For a Thelnari, proper nutrition would cost at least 200 credits monthly. Sela would receive her 50 credits and have to choose. She could spend it all on substandard food for herself, slowly starving while maintaining minimal function for her work. Or she could give it all to Kira, buying the child a few more weeks of life while she herself wasted away. Most chose their children. The station administrators knew this. The bidders knew this. Everyone in this room knew this. 750, the pleasure station operator said, sounding bored. Peter noticed Sela's hand tighten on Kira's head. The little girl was swaying slightly, and Peter realized she was weak from hunger. How long had they been surviving on station charity? 3 months? For however long it was, the charity had clearly run out. 800. A new bidder, another labor broker. The auctioneer nodded, his multiple arms gesturing smoothly. We have 800 credits for a 10-year contract. Quality worker, multiple language capabilities. Do I hear 850? Peter had seen enough. He stepped forward from the back wall, his boots loud on the metal floor. Heads turned to look at the human in the Terran Diplomatic Corps uniform. In this sector, humans were still relatively uncommon, still viewed with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. 5,000 credits, Peter said clearly. The auction hall went silent. The auctioneer's arms froze mid-gesture. Every being in the room turned to stare at the human who had just offered more than 6 times the current bid. On the platform, Sela's eyes went wide. For the first time since stepping up there, she showed emotion. Fear flickered across her face, followed quickly by confusion. Excuse me, the auctioneer stammered. 5,000 credits, Peter repeated, his voice calm and steady. For the full 10-year contract. Standard terms as posted. The mining corporation representative turned in his seat. That is absurd. The market rate. I am not interested in the market rate, Peter interrupted. I am making a bid. 5,000 credits. Do you accept or not? The auctioneer's mouth opened and closed. His species did not typically show expressions, but Peter could sense the confusion radiating from him. Yes, that is an acceptable bid. Does anyone wish to counter? The room remained silent. No one was foolish enough to enter a bidding war with someone who had just jumped the price that high. The pleasure station operators whispered among themselves and then shook their heads. The mining corporation representative sat back with a disgusted grunt. Sold, the auctioneer finally announced. 10-year standard contract to the Terran representative for 5,000 credits. Peter walked forward to the processing desk as murmurs filled the auction hall. He could hear the whispers, the speculation. Why would a human pay so much? What does Terra want with a Thalnari? Probably some diplomatic scheme. Humans are soft. Everyone knows it. Let them talk, Peter thought. He had learned long ago that being underestimated was often an advantage. At the platform, Sela remained frozen, her arms now wrapped protectively around Kira. The little girl was crying softly, not understanding what was happening but sensing her mother's fear. Sela's eyes followed Peter as he approached the desk, and in those eyes, he saw the terrible calculation taking place. She had expected cruelty from whoever bought her contract. She had steeled herself for it. But the human's bizarre overpayment had thrown all her expectations into chaos, and that uncertainty was somehow worse than knowing the devil she would serve. Peter pulled out his credit chip and placed it on the scanner. The transaction processed quickly. 5,000 credits transferred from the Terran Diplomatic Corps Discretionary Fund to Station Vel 9's Commerce Authority. In exchange, Peter received a data chip containing Sela's contract, her medical records, and her legal status as an indentured worker under his supervision for the next 10 years. He looked up at the platform where Sela still stood, holding her daughter close. Their eyes met across the auction hall, and Peter saw the question burning in her gaze. What did this human want from her? What price would she truly pay for her daughter's survival? Peter gave her a small nod, then turned to the auctioneer. I will collect them from processing in 1 hour. Please ensure they receive a medical scan and access to proper Thalnari nutrition during that time. The auctioneer blinked. Thalnari nutrition is not part of standard processing. Then make it part of this processing, Peter said firmly. I just paid you 10 times what you expected for this contract. I think you can manage a decent meal. Without waiting for a response, Peter turned and walked out of the auction hall, leaving behind a room full of confused bidders and one terrified Thalnari mother who had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she could not possibly imagine. Peter stood in the processing center's waiting area, reviewing the contract details on his data pad. The legal language was deliberately complex, filled with clauses designed to protect the station and the contract holder while giving the indentured worker almost no rights. He had seen similar documents before, each one a reminder of how easily desperation could be turned into profit. The door slid open and Sela emerged, holding Kira's hand tightly. They had been cleaned and scanned, but they still wore the same worn clothing. Sela's eyes found Peter immediately, and he saw her body tense. She whispered something to Kira, and the little girl pressed closer to her mother's side. Peter stood and offered what he hoped was a reassuring smile. My name is Peter Hayes. I know you were told, but I wanted to introduce myself properly. Sela said nothing. Her face remained carefully blank, but Peter could see the muscles in her jaw working. She was preparing herself for whatever came next. I have quarters on the diplomatic level, Peter continued. Let's go there. You both must be tired. Sir, Sela said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The contract specifies crew berth assignment for workers. I know what the contract says, Peter interrupted gently, but I am changing those terms. Come with me, please. He turned and walked toward the exit, not looking back to see if they followed. He heard soft footsteps behind him a moment later. Sela had learned the first rule of servitude quickly. When the contract holder gives an order, you obey. The walk through Station Vel 9 took 15 minutes. Peter deliberately chose the longer route through the main concourse instead of the service corridors. He wanted Sela to see normal station life, to see beings moving freely, making choices. He wanted her to remember that freedom existed, even if she believed she had lost hers. Kira stumbled once, her legs weak. Sela caught her immediately, lifting the child into her arms despite her own obvious exhaustion. Peter slowed his pace but said nothing. He noticed several station residents glancing at them. A human in a Terran uniform was unusual enough. A human with a clearly malnourished Thalnari and child drew curious stares. They reached the diplomatic level and Peter pressed his hand to the security panel. The door to his quarters slid open, revealing a space far larger than standard station accommodations. There was a main living area with comfortable furniture, a small kitchen unit, a workspace and 2 separate sleeping chambers. Sela stopped just inside the doorway, her eyes scanning the room with obvious confusion. This was not crew quarters. This was not even standard guest quarters. These were the kind of accommodations reserved for ambassadors and high-ranking officials. "Please sit down," Peter said, gesturing to the couch. Sela hesitated, then slowly moved to the couch. She sat on the very edge, still holding Kira in her lap. The little girl's eyes were enormous as she looked around the room, but she remained silent. Peter went to the kitchen unit and accessed the station's food service network. He scrolled through the options until he found the Thalnari dietary section. As he suspected, it was limited and expensive. He ordered several items: protein cakes made from processed algae, mineral-enriched grain porridge, fresh vegetables that had been grown in the station's hydroponics bay, and sweet fruit paste that he suspected might appeal to a child. "Food will be here in 10 minutes, Peter said, turning back to them. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" Sela stared at him for a long moment. "Sir, I do not understand what you want from us." "Right now, I want you to eat and rest," Peter replied. "After that, we can talk about the future." "The contract," Sela began. "The contract is a piece of legal documentation that I now own," Peter said firmly but not unkindly. "What happens next is not dictated by that contract. It is dictated by what I choose to do with it." Sela's arms tightened around Kira. "Please," she whispered and her voice cracked. "Please, whatever you want from me I will do it. But she is just a child. She is innocent. Please do not hurt her." Peter felt his chest constrict. He moved slowly to a chair across from them and sat down, keeping his posture open and non-threatening. "Sela, I'm not going to hurt either of you. That is not why I bought your contract." "Then why?" The question burst out of her. "Why pay so much? What could you possibly want that is worth 5,000 credits?" "To answer that, I need to ask you some questions first," Peter said. "Is that all right?" Sela nodded slowly, her distrust evident but her options limited. "Tell me how you ended up on Station Vel 9, Peter said. For a long moment Sela said nothing. Then, with Kira still in her arms, she began to speak. Her voice was flat, emotionless, as if she had told this story so many times that it had lost all meaning. "We came from Thelanar Colony 7. It was a small settlement, only 3,000 of us. We had been there for 12 years. We grew crops, raised our families. It was a good life." She paused, and Peter saw her hand stroke Kira's hair in an unconscious gesture of comfort. Then the Viridian Mining Consortium arrived. They had legal claim to mineral rights in our system. The colony administration tried to negotiate. We offered to relocate key settlements, to work around the mining operations. "They did not want to negotiate," Peter said quietly. "No. They said relocation would delay their schedule by 3 months. That delay would cost them profits. So they filed an emergency extraction order with the Galactic Commerce Authority. The order gave us 10 days to evacuate the planet." 10 days, Peter repeated, feeling anger rise in his chest. He had heard of emergency extraction orders before. They were legal under galactic commerce law, designed for situations where resource extraction was deemed economically critical. In practice, they were tools that corporations used to displace inconvenient populations. "We had 10 days to pack up 12 years of our lives," Sela continued. "Most families could only take what they could carry. The consortium provided transport ships, but there were not enough. People were separated. Children lost their parents in the chaos. My mate Kira's father, Her voice wavered for the first time. "He went back to get our family records, our photographs. He wanted Kira to have something to remember her home by. The transport left before he returned. I begged them to wait, but they said the schedule could not be delayed." "I am so sorry," Peter said. "We ended up here on Vel 9. It was supposed to be temporary. The consortium had promised relocation assistance, new settlement options. But when we arrived there was nothing. No assistance, no resettlement program. Just a station full of refugees and no resources to care for them. The station charity provided basic rations for 3 months. After that, we were on our own. The door chime sounded. Peter rose and collected the food delivery. He brought the containers to the low table in front of the couch and began opening them. The smell of real food filled the room. Kira's head lifted from her mother's shoulder. Her small nose twitched, and her eyes focused on the food with desperate hunger. "Please eat," Peter said. Sela did not move at first. Then, with trembling hands, she reached for the grain porridge. She scooped some into a small bowl and began feeding Kira with a spoon. The little girl ate quickly, too quickly, and Sela had to slow her down with gentle words in their language. Peter watched as Kira ate her first real meal in weeks. Color seemed to return to the child's gray-tinged skin almost immediately. When the porridge was gone, Sela gave her some of the sweet fruit paste, and Kira made a small sound of pleasure that broke Peter's heart. Only after Kira had eaten did Sela take food for herself. She ate slowly, carefully, as if she still could not quite believe the food was real and would not be taken away. Kira finished eating and curled up against her mother's side. Within minutes, the exhausted child was asleep, her small body finally relaxing for the first time in months. Sela looked down at her sleeping daughter, then up at Peter. "What happens now?" she asked. Peter leaned forward, his expression serious. "Now I tell you the truth. I did not buy your contract to exploit you, Sela. I bought it to nullify it. But before we get to that, I have a proposal for you. One that I hope you will consider." Sela's eyes widened, confusion and disbelief warring across her features. "I do not understand." "I know," Peter said gently. "But you will. I promise you, by the end of this conversation, you will understand exactly what I am offering and why. And then, for the first time in 3 months, you will have a real choice to make." Peter pulled out his data pad and set it on the table between them. The screen glowed softly in the dimmed quarters, displaying the contract that legally bound Sela to 10 years of servitude. With Kira sleeping peacefully against her side, Sela watched as Peter accessed the contract management system. "This document," Peter said, tapping the screen, "gives me legal authority over your labor, your movement, and your basic rights for the next decade. According to galactic commerce law, you are my property in all but name." Sela flinched at the words, but she did not look away. "Yes, sir. I want you to watch carefully what I am about to do," Peter said. He navigated through several menus, found the contract termination option and selected it. A warning appeared on screen, asking him to confirm that he understood terminating a contract early would forfeit all payments made. Peter pressed confirm without hesitation. The screen flashed. The contract status changed from active to nullified. Just like that, 5,000 credits vanished into the station's administrative fees, and Sela was no longer bound to servitude. Sela stared at the screen. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. She looked from the data pad to Peter and back again, as if waiting for the trick to reveal itself. "You are free," Peter said simply. "The contract is void. You owe me nothing." "I do not, why would you?" Sela could not form complete sentences. Her hands shook as she held her sleeping daughter closer. "This makes no sense. You paid 5,000 credits. You just erased it all. Why?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Peter said. "But I also need to be honest with you, Sela. I did not come to Station Vel 9 planning to free slaves. I came here for diplomatic work. What I saw in that auction hall made me angry, and yes, I acted on that anger. But I also have a genuine need that I think you could fill." Sela's expression hardened slightly. There it was. The trap she had been waiting for. Peter saw the change and raised his hands. "Please just listen before you decide what I am asking. The Terran Diplomatic Corps is expanding its operations in this sector. We are encountering dozens of species we barely understand. Cultural misunderstandings are common. We need people who can help us navigate these differences, people who understand what it is like to be displaced, to be desperate, to deal with systems that do not care about individual suffering." "You want me to work for you?" Sela said carefully. "I want to offer you employment," Peter corrected. "Real employment. Not servitude. You would be a cultural liaison, helping Terra understand refugee situations and how to provide better assistance. You would receive a salary of 1,500 credits per month, standard Terran benefits including medical care, housing allowance, and educational support." Sela laughed. It was a bitter, disbelieving sound. "You are describing a professional position. You are talking to a refugee who just sold herself into slavery. What qualifications could I possibly have?" "You speak 4 languages," Peter said. "You have experienced the refugee crisis firsthand. You understand the systems that exploit desperate people because you have been caught in those systems. You know what real help looks like versus empty promises. Those are the qualifications that matter to me. And what would happen to Kira? Sela asked, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Kira would attend the educational center on the Terran diplomatic ship, Peter said. We have programs for children of all species. She would be with other kids her age, learning, playing, being a child instead of slowly starving on a station that does not care if she lives or dies. Sela closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks and she made no effort to wipe them away. No species does this. In all the galaxy, no one offers this kind of help without expecting something terrible in return. What is the real price? What do you actually want from me? Peter was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and walked to the window that looked out over the station. The lights of docked ships twinkled in the darkness of space beyond. My species has a very dark history, Peter said, his back still to Sela. For thousands of years, humans bought and sold each other. We built entire economies on the suffering of enslaved people. We told ourselves it was natural, that some people were meant to serve and others to rule. We created elaborate justifications for cruelty. He turned to face her. It took centuries of struggle, of people fighting and dying for freedom, before we finally made slavery illegal everywhere on Earth. But the legacy of that evil still haunts us. We still deal with the inequalities it created, the hatred it bred, the trauma that was passed down through generations. Then you understand, Sela said quietly. You understand what it feels like to be property. Our ancestors do, Peter said. And they taught us to never, ever allow it to happen again. When Terra joined the galactic community and discovered that servitude contracts were legal, that entire populations could be displaced for corporate profit, that children could watch their parents sell themselves just to survive, it was like looking into a mirror that showed us our own worst history. So this is guilt, Sela said. You are trying to make up for your past. Maybe partly, Peter admitted. But it is more than that. We decided, as a species, what we want to stand for in the galaxy. We decided that when we see suffering we have the power to stop, we stop it. When we see injustice we can fight, we fight it. Not because it benefits us but because it is who we have chosen to be. Sela looked down at Kira, still sleeping peacefully. The child's breathing was steady and deep, the sleep of someone who was finally, truly safe. I want to believe you, Sela whispered. I want to believe this is real. But I am so afraid. That is completely reasonable, Peter said. You would be foolish not to be suspicious. So I am not asking you to trust me completely right now. I'm asking you to take a small step. Come to the Terran ship tomorrow. Meet my team. See the educational center where Kira would go. Talk to other aliens who work with us. Make an informed decision based on what you see, not just what I tell you. And if I say no? Sela asked. Then I help you get settled somewhere else, Peter said. I can arrange transport to a colony that accepts Thelnari refugees, provide you with enough credits to start over. The contract is already voided. You owe me nothing regardless of what you choose. Sela sat in silence for a long time, absently stroking Kira's hair. Peter waited, not pushing, letting her process everything she had heard. Finally, Sela spoke. I will come tomorrow. I will look at what you are offering. But I am not promising anything beyond that. That is all I ask, Peter said. He stood and gestured toward one of the sleeping chambers. That room is yours for tonight. The bed is clean, the door locks from the inside. You and Kira should rest. We can talk more in the morning. Sela carefully stood, cradling Kira in her arms. She walked toward the sleeping chamber, then paused at the doorway. Peter, she said, using his name for the first time. If this is real, if you are telling the truth, then you are offering me something I thought was impossible. Oh, I do not know if I can survive having hope torn away again. Then we will make sure it is not torn away, Peter said softly. Sela nodded once and disappeared into the sleeping chamber. Peter heard the door lock engage a moment later. The next morning, Peter took Sela and Kira to the Terran diplomatic ship docked at Station Vel 9. The ship was called the Unity, and it housed a crew of 200 humans and 40 aliens from various species. As they walked through the corridors, Sela noticed something immediately. The aliens were not servants or contracted workers. They wore the same uniforms as the humans, held the same ranks, moved with the same authority. Peter introduced her to his team. There was Sarah, a human woman who managed refugee assistance programs. There was Kelvin, a Porvithi medical officer who had joined Terra's service 3 years ago. There was Chin, a human engineer who worked alongside a Zenthian named RYX designing better life support systems for multi-species crews. They all greeted Sela warmly. No one treated her like a former slave or a desperate refugee. They spoke to her like a colleague, asking about her experience, her languages, her understanding of Thelnari culture. Then Peter took her to the educational center. It was a large, bright space filled with learning stations, play areas, and small groups of children. Human children sat next to KRLL children working on puzzles together. A young Zenthian was teaching a human girl how to draw in her species' traditional style. A teacher approached them, a kind-faced human woman named Grace. "You must be Kira," she said, kneeling down to the child's level. "We have been hoping to meet you. Would you like to see our art station? We just got new supplies this morning." Kira looked up at her mother, uncertainty in her eyes. Sela nodded, and slowly, Kira let go of her mother's hand and walked toward the art station with Grace. Within minutes, Kira was sitting at a table with 3 human children, all of them drawing with colorful markers. One of the human children, a boy about Kira's age, said something that made Kira giggle. It was a small sound, quiet and tentative, but it was the first time Sela had heard her daughter laugh in 4 months. Sela's composure cracked. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter play like a normal child. Peter stood beside her, saying nothing. He simply handed her a tissue and let her cry. "I will take the job," Sela said through her tears. "I do not fully trust this yet. I'm still waiting for the trap. But I will take the job because even if this all falls apart tomorrow," Kira just laughed. "That is worth the risk." "There is no trap," Peter said quietly. "But I understand you need time to believe that. Welcome to the team, Sela." 3 months had passed since Sela accepted the position with the Terran Diplomatic Corps. She still woke up some mornings expecting to find herself back in the cramped charity shelter on Station Vel 9, still waiting for reality to snap back into the nightmare it had been. But every morning she opened her eyes to comfortable quarters on the Unity, heard Kira humming in the next room as she got ready for school, and had to accept that this was real. Her work had proven more challenging than she expected, but in good ways. Peter had not given her simple tasks to make her feel useful. He had given her real problems to solve. Just last week, she had helped negotiate with a group of KRLL refugees who were suspicious of Terran aid offers. Because she understood their fear, understood what it felt like to wait for the trap to spring, she had been able to speak to them in ways the human diplomats could not. Sela sat in the Unity's common area, reviewing reports on her data pad. Around her, the morning shift change was happening. Crew members of different species greeted each other, shared coffee and tea and various other beverages, talked about their families and their work. It was so normal that Sela sometimes forgot how extraordinary it was. "Mom?" Kira came running into the common area, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. The child had gained weight over the past 3 months. Her skin had returned to its proper blue shade, her eyes were bright, and she moved with the boundless energy that children were supposed to have. "Look what I made in art class." She held up a drawing. It showed stick figures of different colors and sizes holding hands in front of a large ship. Sela recognized herself and Kira, Peter, and several of Kira's friends from the educational center. "It is beautiful," Sela said, hugging her daughter. "You are very talented." "Teacher Grace says we are going on a field trip next week," Kira said excitedly. "To the station's hydroponics bay. We get to see how they grow vegetables in space." A human girl named Amy ran up to join them. "Kira, come on. We are going to be late for morning assembly." Kira gave her mother a quick kiss on the cheek and ran off with her friend, laughing and chattering. Sela watched them go, still marveling at the transformation. 3 months ago, Kira had been too weak to run. Now she was racing through corridors with other children, making friends, learning, growing. "She is doing well," a voice said beside her. Sela turned to find Sarah, the human woman who managed the refugee programs. She sat down next to Sela with a cup of coffee. "She is thriving," Sela agreed. "Sometimes I look at her and I cannot believe this is the same child who was starving on that station." "You both have come a long way," Sarah said. She hesitated, then added, "Sela, I wanted to talk to you about something. We have a situation developing on Station Vel 9. Sela felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of situation?" "The station administrator has requested a meeting with Peter. Apparently, there have been some complaints about Terran activities affecting the station's economy." Sarah's expression was carefully neutral, but Sela could sense there was more to the story. "What does that mean?" Sela asked. Sarah took a sip of her coffee. "It means that what Peter did for you was not an isolated incident. Terra has been conducting similar operations across multiple stations in this sector for the past 2 years." Sela stared at her. Similar operations. You mean buying contracts and freeing people? Exactly that, Sela confirmed. We have freed over 300 indentured workers in the past 2 years. Most of them now work for Terra in various capacities. Some have chosen to settle on colony worlds. A few have returned to their home planets. But all of them were given a choice. 300 people, Sela whispered. That must have cost millions of credits. It has, Sela said. And now the stations are starting to notice. Their labor markets are being disrupted. The price of servitude contracts has gone up because there is a Terran buyer who will pay premium prices and then immediately free the workers. Some stations are threatening to ban Terran representatives from their auctions. Is that legal? Sela asked. Technically, yes. Stations can refuse service to anyone. But it creates diplomatic problems. Terra has trade agreements with most of these stations. Banning our representatives would violate those agreements. Sela looked at Sela carefully. Peter wants you to attend the meeting with the station administrator. He thinks your perspective as a former contract worker would be valuable. Sela felt a flutter of nervousness. When is the meeting? This afternoon. We will dock at Vel 9 in 2 hours. The meeting took place in one of Station Vel 9's administrative offices. Sela walked in beside Peter, feeling strange to be back on the station where her life had almost ended. The administrator, a Viridian named Torque, sat behind a large desk. His expression was cold and unwelcoming. Commander Hayes, Torque said without preamble. Your activities are destroying our economy. Your economy is built on the suffering of desperate people, Peter replied calmly. If our activities are destroying it, then it deserves to be destroyed. Torque's face darkened. That is easy for you to say when you come from a wealthy species. Not all of us have the luxury of Terra's resources. This station depends on affordable labor to function. Affordable labor, Peter repeated. You mean people so desperate that they sell themselves for less than the cost of decent food? You mean mothers who have to choose between feeding themselves or their children? The contracts are voluntary, Torque said. No one forces these people to sign. No, you just create conditions where signing is the only way to survive, Peter said. His voice remained level, but Sela could hear the anger beneath it. You call it choice, but it is coercion dressed in legal language. Torque stood up, his large frame towering over the desk. What you call coercion is simply market dynamics. Supply and demand. These people have labor to sell and buyers are willing to purchase it. That is how economies work. Not all economies, Peter said. Not anymore. You cannot change the galaxy by throwing money at the problem, Torque said. Even Terra does not have unlimited resources. Eventually you will stop. And when you do, everything will return to the way it was. You are not solving anything. You are just making yourself feel better about your species' guilty conscience. Sela had been silent up to this point, but now she spoke. I was one of the people you are calling a market commodity. I stood on that auction platform with my daughter, selling myself because it was the only option left. You want to know what Commander Hayes accomplished by buying my contract? Torque turned his attention to her for the first time. I know who you are. You were freed and given a comfortable job. One person. A drop in the ocean compared to the millions of refugees in this sector. One person who now helps dozens of others, Sela said, standing up to meet his gaze. One person who can speak to refugees in their own languages and convince them that Terran help is genuine. One person who knows which aid programs work and which ones are just empty gestures. You are right that Terra cannot save everyone. But they can save some. And those some can help save others. That is how real change happens. Torque snorted. Idealistic nonsense. In 5 years this initiative will be forgotten, and we will still be here, running our stations the way we always have. Peter stood as well. Maybe you are right. Maybe Terra will give up this effort eventually. Maybe we will run out of money or political will. But right now, in this moment, we are making a choice about who we want to be. We are choosing to say that some things are more important than profit, that some markets should not exist, that the desperation of refugees is not an acceptable foundation for an economy. And I am telling you that your choice is destroying legitimate businesses, Torque said. Good, Peter said flatly. Find a market that doesn't trade in desperation. The words hung in the air. Torque's expression shifted from anger to shock. He had clearly expected negotiation, compromise, perhaps an apology. Instead, Peter had essentially declared economic war on the very concept of servitude contracts. You cannot be serious, Torque said. I am completely serious, Peter replied. Terra will continue to purchase and free indentured workers wherever we find them. We will pay whatever price is necessary. And yes, if that destroys your labor market, we will celebrate that destruction. The Galactic Council will hear about this, Torque threatened. I am counting on it, Peter said. In fact, I plan to present our findings to the Council next month. I have detailed records of servitude contracts across this sector. The conditions, the terms, the demographics of who ends up in these contracts. The Council might be very interested to learn how many of these contracts involve refugees from corporate displacement operations. Torque's face went pale. Corporate displacement was a sensitive topic in galactic politics. Many Council members had investments in the corporations that conducted these operations. You are playing a dangerous game, Commander, Torque said quietly. It is not a game, Peter said. It is a statement. Terra is stating clearly what we will and will not tolerate. What the Council does with that information is up to them. The meeting ended shortly after. As Sela and Peter walked back toward the Unity's docking port, Sela finally spoke. That was either very brave or very foolish, she said. Peter smiled slightly. Probably both. But it needed to be said. You really plan to take this to the Council? Yes. It is time for a larger conversation about what kind of galaxy we want to live in. Sela stopped walking and turned to face him. For 3 months I have been waiting for the trap. Waiting for the moment when I discover what Terra really wants from all of us you have freed. But there is no trap, is there? No, Peter said simply. You are actually doing this because you believe it is right. Not for strategic advantage, not for political gain. Just because it is right. Yes. Sela felt something shift inside her. The last piece of her doubt crumbled away. Then I want to help. When you go to the Council, I want to testify. I want to tell them what servitude really means. I want them to see the face of the people they are treating as commodities. Peter smiled. I was hoping you would say that. They continued toward the ship, and for the first time since her world had been destroyed, Sela felt like she was part of something bigger than survival. She was part of a movement, a statement, a declaration that compassion could be as powerful as any weapon in shaping the future of the galaxy. The Galactic Council chamber was vast, designed to hold representatives from hundreds of different species. Circular tiers rose up from the central floor, each level filled with delegates in various forms and sizes. Some breathed oxygen, others methane. Some stood on legs, others floated in specialized atmosphere containers. But all of them were watching the display screens that showed Sela standing at the speaker's platform. She wore the formal uniform of a Terran cultural liaison. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edges of the podium, but her voice was steady when she spoke. My name is Sela. 4 months ago, I stood on an auction platform on Station Vel 9 and sold myself into 10 years of servitude. I did this because my daughter was starving and I had no other choice. That is what you need to understand about servitude contracts. They are not truly voluntary. They are what happens when you take away every other option and then call what remains a choice. A delegate from the Viridian Mining Consortium interrupted. The contracts are legal under current galactic commerce law. Your emotional appeal does not change that fact. You are correct, Sela said. The contracts are legal. Slavery was once legal too on many worlds. Legality and morality are not the same thing. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Sela continued. I want to describe 2 different experiences for you. The first is what my life would have been under the servitude contract. I would have worked 16-hour days in whatever role my contract holder chose. I would have received 50 credits per month, barely enough to buy substandard food. My daughter would have been allowed to stay with me only if it did not interfere with my work duties. If she became sick, medical care would have been at my contract holder's discretion. After 10 years, if I survived, I would be released with nothing. No savings, no skills training, no future. She paused, looking around the chamber. The second experience is what actually happened. A human bought my contract and immediately freed me. He offered me employment with fair wages, medical benefits, and education for my daughter. I now work as a cultural liaison, helping Terra understand refugee situations. My daughter attends school with children of many species. She is healthy, happy, and safe. In 3 months, I have saved more money than I could have saved in 10 years of servitude. One fortunate case does not represent systemic reality, another delegate called out. You are right, Sela agreed. So let me tell you about the others. Terra has freed over 300 indentured workers in the past 2 years. I have met many of them. A KRYL engineer who now designs better life support systems. A Porvithi doctor who treats patients across species lines. A Zenthian pilot who trains the next generation of navigators. Every one of them has a similar story. Desperation, purchase, freedom, opportunity. A delegate from the Economic Council stood. The Terran representative has submitted extensive documentation about these operations. What concerns this council is whether Terra is engaging in strategic population manipulation. Are you building a client state of grateful aliens who will support Terran interests? Peter stood from the Terran delegation section. May I address that question? The council chairman nodded. Peter walked down to stand beside Sela at the speaker's platform. The delegate raises a fair concern, Peter began. It would be naive to claim there is no strategic benefit to Terra in what we have done. The people we have freed do tend to be grateful. Some choose to work with us. Some become advocates for closer Terran cooperation with their home species. There are political and economic benefits to our actions. Sela glanced at Peter, surprised by his candor. Several delegates leaned forward, sensing an admission. However, Peter continued, I want to be absolutely clear about something. Even if there was no strategic benefit whatsoever, Terra would still do this. Even if every person we freed chose to leave and never speak to us again, we would still do this. Even if it cost us politically and economically, we would still do this. Because this is not primarily about strategy. It is about the kind of civilization we have chosen to be. That is easy to claim, a delegate said. How can you prove such intentions? I cannot prove intentions, Peter said. But I can show you patterns. Terra has freed workers who have no political value to us. We have freed people from species that actively oppose our council proposals. We have freed children too young to work, elderly individuals with no economic utility, people with disabilities that make employment difficult. If this was purely strategic, we would only free those who could benefit us. But we do not. We free whoever we find in desperate situations, regardless of their value to us. The chairman spoke. Commander Hayes, your documentation shows that Terra has spent over 40 million credits on these operations. That is a significant expenditure for what you claim is purely moral action. Your own government must have strategic justifications for approving such spending. Peter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My government approved this spending because we decided, as a species, that we do not want to live in a galaxy where slavery is just called by different names. We looked at servitude contracts and saw our own history reflected back at us. We remembered what it was like to be the ones buying and selling people. We remembered the centuries of suffering that created. And we said never again. Not for us and not while we have the power to stop it for others. But you cannot stop it everywhere, another delegate pointed out. You cannot free every indentured worker in the galaxy. This is an impossible task. You are absolutely right, Peter said. We cannot save everyone. But we can save some. And those some can save others. Sela now helps refugees navigate aid systems and avoid exploitation. The KRYL engineer designs cheaper life support systems that make space stations more accessible to poor refugees. The Porvathy doctor treats people who cannot afford medical care. Every person we free becomes someone who can help others. That is how change happens. Not all at once, but person by person, choice by choice. The debate continued for hours. Some delegates condemned Terra's actions as economic interference. Others cautiously supported the humanitarian goals. A few began discussing similar programs for their own species. But the turning point came when Kira's image appeared on the display screens. Peter had included footage from the Unity's educational center. The recording showed Kira laughing with human and alien children, working on a science project, celebrating her birthday with friends from 6 different species. The contrast between the vibrant, healthy child on screen and the starving girl from Sela's testimony was undeniable. That is my daughter, Sela said quietly. 4 months ago she was dying. Today she is thriving. You can debate the politics and economics all you want. But look at her and tell me that Terra's actions were wrong. Look at her and tell me that servitude contracts are acceptable. Look at her and tell me that profit margins matter more than a child's life. The chamber fell silent. Even the delegates who had been most critical could not find words to argue against the simple truth on the screen. A child who had been saved. A child who was now free. The vote was close, but the council passed a resolution recommending stricter regulations on servitude contracts. It was not everything Terra wanted, but it was a start. Several stations, including Vel 9, announced immediate reforms to avoid losing trade agreements with species that supported the new guidelines. 2 weeks after the council hearing, Sela received a message from the Terran Colonial Administration. She was being offered permanent residency on New Earth, a colony world in the Outer Rim. The message included housing options, job opportunities, and information about schools for Kira. Sela sat in her quarters on the Unity, reading the message over and over. Permanent residency. A real home, not just temporary quarters on a ship. A place where Kira could grow up, make lasting friends, build a life. Mom, what are you reading? Kira asked, climbing up onto the couch beside her. Information about a planet called New Earth, Sela said. We might go live there. Is that our home? Kira asked. Sela started to explain the difference between temporary and permanent residence, between a posting and a settlement. But then she stopped. She looked at her daughter, who no longer remembered what it felt like to be hungry, who thought it was normal to have friends from different species, who believed the galaxy was a safe place where people helped each other. Yes, Sela said simply. It could be our home. But I thought Thelenar was our home, Kira said. You told me stories about it. Thelenar was home once, Sela said carefully. But home is not just a place you were born. Home is where you are safe, where you are loved, where you can grow and learn and become whoever you want to be. Kira thought about this. Then the Unity is home too. A new Earth could be home. And anywhere we go together is home. Sela felt tears prick her eyes. Her daughter understood something that had taken Sela months to accept. Home was not a lost planet or a specific location. Home was freedom. Home was safety. Home was the chance to build a future instead of just surviving. Yes, Sela said, pulling Kira close. Anywhere we go together is home. 3 months later, Sela and Kira stood on the landing platform of New Earth's main settlement. The sky was blue, similar to Thelenar but with a slightly different shade. The air smelled of growing things, of possibilities, of a future that was theirs to shape. Peter had come to see them off. You will do well here, he said. The colony already has a small Thelnari community. You will not be alone. I know, Sela said. Thank you, Peter. For everything. Thank you, Peter replied. For trusting us when you had every reason not to. For standing up at the council and telling your story. You helped change things, Sela. You made a difference. Kira tugged at Peter's sleeve. Will you visit us? Absolutely, Peter promised. I will come check on you and make sure you are settling in well. As Peter's shuttle lifted off, Sela watched it go. She thought about the auction platform, about the terror of that day, about how close she had come to losing everything. But she also thought about what had happened since. The kindness of strangers. The possibility of redemption. The power of choosing compassion over cruelty. Kira took her hand. Come on, Mom. Let's go see our new house. They walked together toward the settlement, toward their new home, toward a future that 4 months ago had seemed impossible. And Sela realized that Peter had been right. Compassion was not weakness. It was the most powerful statement any civilization could make. It was the declaration that some things mattered more than profit, more than politics, more than power. It was the simple but profound truth that every life had value, that every person deserved dignity, and that the measure of a civilization was not in its wealth or strength, but in how it treated those who had nothing left to offer except their humanity. And in that moment, walking hand in hand with her daughter under an alien sky that was becoming home, Sela knew that she was witnessing the birth of something rare in the galaxy. Not an empire built on conquest, but a community built on compassion. Not a statement of dominance but a statement of hope. It was enough.